Hi and welcome to Background Fundamentals. I'm Mike Seymour. Well, of course, we always say each week we would like your questions in the forums. We want you to send stuff in. And so this week's a really great example of that because somebody asked, hey, how do we do things behind the scenes here at FXPhD? What's the process of our workflow? So we thought, hey, it's a really good chance to show you that because actually at the moment we're in a bit of a transition period in changing how we're kind of doing stuff, certainly here out of the Sydney office. So we thought, why not walk you through kind of all the bits and pieces that go together into an episode of Background, only so we can give you an idea of sort of the tech that we've chosen. So I'm not saying this is perfect for everyone, I'm just saying it really works well for us. But as I say, we're changing the way we're doing things fundamentally at the moment. We're moving from a previous workflow to a new one. So let's start with that original workflow that we've been doing now for some time. And it's centered around shooting, as we have been just then, on the 5D Mark III. We've been shooting on the Red and the Epic. And we take all that footage and we transcode it to a common ProRes base, ProRes Lite QT. And we edit that in Final Cut. And that's what we've been doing for a long time. A little time ago, we decided to move over to then exporting that out as an XML, taking it into Resolve, and actually doing the color grade. From there, we go and reconform it again in Final Cut, export that as a ProRes Lite master. That's quite a large file. And we do a whole second pass transcoding that down through compressor to the file size that you're used to. Last step, we put a wrapper on it before it's put into the feed so that it can be used either as a download, part of the BitTorrent, or an immediate download on our website. Okay, so that's the sort of the standard workflow, certainly out of this office. And then we decided to change it. And we decided to change it to this, which is to still shoot on the 5Ds or the Reds, just like we had before, but then to move to Premiere, because then we can basically do the same thing with an export to Resolve so that we can grade. Interestingly, we're not using speed grade. Come back to Premiere and reconform, and then go through that process of exporting again not using Adobe's encoder, and compress it down to through the two passes to get us out to the final version that has the wrapper put on it and put up on our website. So the fundamental changes, we've adopted Premiere. But what I want to discuss is, in addition to all the other things we're going to touch on, why we only went with the Premiere. Why didn't we go with SpeedGrade? Why didn't we go with Prelude? Why didn't we use other things? So we'll discuss that and give you some insight into what Adobe's doing, but also our take on what is working for us or not. So let's start on the shoot. Obviously, we have a studio here at the Tech Bunker, the Tech Compound, and we shoot, as I said before, with these cameras. Let's discuss the lighting, though, for a second. So on this camera, obviously I should be lit just for myself, but if I go back to this camera, you get a bit of an idea what's happening in the setup around me. Now, if you're part of the DOP course this term, you'll know that some of this stuff is going to be discussed in that course, and you'll recognise some of this in that course when the time comes, because it's modelled off work that Ben will be discussing. Ben Allen, the professor in the DOP course. I've got on your camera right, I've got my primary key light. It's a Kinoflow, and I have here over my shoulder with my fill light. And then what I'm being lit with now, but of course normally is my back rim light, is high 650 spot. Now that's, as I say at the moment, giving me front light, but that's interesting because it's actually not on a classic Hollywood lighting setup where my backlight, my rim light, would be in fact opposite my key light. But that's kind of subtle stuff that we'll cover over in the DOP course. Other stuff you'll see from this camera angle is that we have sound baffling around me, as well as a black cloth here on our table. And the reason for this is that this is quite a large studio, and there's obviously a lot of echo in the room and a lot of sort of stuff that we don't want bouncing back. Now, if I turn this way again, what you shouldn't see is any of that stuff, but we've brought it in as close as we can so as to kind of deaden down the sound. There's one other thing you can't see, I don't think, from either camera angle, which is I'm standing on carpet. So there's a large piece of carpet here, we've got black baffle, and we've got black cloth that's very absorbent of sound. And so hopefully that's kind of really bringing it in. And we have actually gone even further. And this is sort of my standard lighting for a straight up setup, though of course we often change that and muck around with it. We use the LEDs and the Kinoflows. Kinoflows traditionally because they're a great area light. They also don't pull a lot of power. We actually have three-phase power in our studio, but we don't want to be pulling a lot of power because often we are shooting outside and in the areas outside this particular studio. The Kinoflows are great, but we use the LEDs and the 5Ds when we go out to, say, a SIGGRAPH or, as we will be next term, GDC, because we want to have a really small kit that we can just carry and not sort of be conspicuous. If we carry the Epics, it's kind of conspicuous kit. That being said, when we can use things like the red Epics, we get to shoot with gorgeous lenses like the Cooke and other great PL glass that we have in our collection. But we are absolutely completely open to shooting with Canon glass on the Epics. We have Canon mounts for them as well. The only reason, I guess, not to do that for us is that if we're trying to pull focus and stuff, pulling focus on L-series glass doesn't work very well, just not geared for it, whereas, of course, the PL glass is. That being said, you can't get past a Cooke 75 for just a gorgeous look. And I'm vain enough to be quite happy to be shot with it. Okay, so those are the basic workflows. I should also point out we do shoot with GoPros, Sonys, Alexas, a bunch of other cameras. We just don't own most of those. Well, we own the GoPro. And we try and shoot in a compressed fashion. So the 5Ds files only 8-bit, but we are in fact running those with Cineform on them, so we get effectively a kind of a log file out of them. And of course, we're taking stuff out of the reds. There's a lot of latitude because it's not an 8-bit file. So that's basically the setup in the studio, other than audio, and I'll come back to the gear that I'm actually wearing to transmit back. But at the moment, this is being recorded off the camera that I'm looking at right now, though all the cameras will sync up, and we'll get back into that in 1 second. So the next question is, how do we take this footage when we come off set? When we come off set, we move into, for example, with the red, we move into Red Cine X. So in Red Cine X, which you can see here, this is a great free tool, and we use it for processing stuff with the red rocket card, and it runs out to a RAID. The reason we have the RAID there and the red rocket set up that way is that the actual speed of the red rocket means that what we don't want to have is a bottleneck going to the drives. So there's a RAID there that's got multiple spindles, which mean we can get a good data flow out of the red rocket card and down and out. Though not really a problem, I guess, if we're shooting on the Canon. Actually, on the Canon, we sometimes pre-process the Canon files and sometimes we don't, and that'll really depend on the workflow, as you'll see in 1 second. Okay, so what about audio? So for audio, we can either record as we are right now off the Epic, which is being fed in, or to what I like, which is the Tascam. Now, I use this Tascam a lot. I like the user interface on it. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. We've gone through a few of these. What I do like is these mic kits. So the Sennheiser mic kits we use are pretty standard. We have like, I don't know how many of these now, quite a lot. We have to change them occasionally because they change the radio frequencies or the law changes in some country. So they are would plug into the bottom of here, of course. And there you go. And that's the receiving end. And then, of course, the transmitting end is what I've got attached to me right now, which is here. And these are just lav mics. They go really well. There's some real great innovations happening in mics. In fact, even as we speak, there's about to even be more innovation in mics. But so at any one time, don't buy anything you don't need to use straight away, right? Because it's like cameras, basically. The second you buy one of these, a new thing comes out and it's kind of out of date. If we're recording on here, we're going to get a WAV file or an ARFF file coming out that's going to need to be sunk to the pictures. Of course, if it's coming out the R3D files, it's already sort of pre-sunk, which is great. You might say, don't we go through a mixer? Well, we would if we were on a shoot where we had multiple actors speaking, but we can actually get two separate streams of audio here, a left and right channel. That's normally all we need for an interview. And you've got to understand, what I'm giving you now is our pipeline for PhD for getting the classes out, not my pipeline for an on-set drama, which would change. But if I was doing an on-set drama, I would actually go to a mixer, and then the mixer would send out a mixed feed that would go to the camera for audio sync. But because we use Pluralize to do a lot of that syncing when we're coming off multiple camera formats, it's always important that the cameras, in fact, do have some kind of mic. So we'll put a shotgun on a camera or anything we can to get some good audio in to go with that vision so that we can use Pluralize to automate the process of hooking up our audio. Okay, so the big change, Final Cut to Premiere. It's a big difference. We were on for many years Final Cut, as I say, but not Final Cut X. We didn't make the transition to the new version. And one of the reasons for that is it didn't have XML, and that was a key part of our workflow by that stage. So we started looking around. We thought, could we use Smoke? Could we use something else? And Premiere seemed to be obviously one of the big options with Avid, and we liked Premiere a lot, so I'll tell you why. There's a lot of stuff in Adobe. Obviously, we use After Effects a lot, and there's a lot of other programs we use. So we already have Photoshop and Lightroom and a ton of other stuff. Premiere was a pretty easy step, but nevertheless, I'll show you why. Okay, If we were to compare Final Cut and Premiere, we have a really interesting problem here because we're nearly always mixing our timelines with GoPro or whatever else we're coming up with. And so having mixed format timelines is much, much better in Premiere than it is in Final Cut. We also don't need to transcode the 5D footage. And what we've had this problem with, I guess, obviously you need to transcode an R3D file most of the time, but you can edit natively with R3D files, but most of the time you sort of would transcode them. With the 5D files, however, we actually had to transcode those as well because Final Cut was just sort of screwing up. Even though they're meant to be, ordinary sort of QuickTime files, they just wouldn't edit very well. So we would re-encode those as ProRes, and then we nearly always have no problems with our timelines. That just meant this added step with the 5D footage, which we didn't really like, which we've saved if we go to Premiere. We can bring in the R3Ds directly to Premiere. We sometimes do, sometimes don't. On the whole, I'd say we don't. And a good reason for that is we're not expecting to do extensive grading and not even expecting to do extensive visual effects work with this stuff because we're tending to produce classes without a lot of stuff. We do, of course, have stuff that's regularly keyed, and we'll get to green screen in a second. But yeah, basically that's how we run. If you're bringing in stuff in Premiere, you can actually access the metadata that is in the R3D files, which is really nice. So that's a good thing to do. And of course, a Premiere timeline can move seamlessly over to After Effects. So that really helps a lot, as a lot of our lower thirds and graphics and those little animated stings and stuff you'll see and wipes and stuff, that's all coming from After Effects. Most of the time they've been designed by John out of Chicago, but they get rendered or updated by our team here in Sydney. In terms of UI and keyboards and stuff, or keyboard shortcuts, you can easily move your Final Cut shortcuts over to Premiere. As far as the UI goes, there's some weird stuff in Premiere that I just don't think is particularly great. For example, I'm so used to in Final Cut clicking on something and it comes to the front, and in Premiere you tend to be juggling your windows more as you have to move things to the front and move things back. It's as if Final Cut's just a little cleaner from an Apple point of view, and I should point out almost all of our PC gear here is Mac as opposed to being Windows-based. So this is the Adobe world, according to Adobe, if this makes sense. So this is not my world right now. This is like sort of Adobe party line, as it were. And don't forget, I'm totally coming at this loving Adobe, but I'm just trying to give you an honest cut of my take on it. So they would say that there's a bunch of stuff that happens that is sort of a pre-shoot kind of thing, like Script, which is a program that, or sorry, Story, which is a program that takes the script and lets you actually break it down and try and divide it into days. And then there's Collage, which is kind of a graphical thing for, as the name implies, just sort of pasting stuff like style kind of frames up. And I would say that both of these aren't very relevant at all, zero almost, to us. The reason that Collage isn't very interesting is if I want to do a style frame, I'm going to do that in Photoshop. I just can't see any advantage on doing that on an iPad. So yeah, I mean, Collage right out of the gate is not very relevant to me. If they'd stuck Photoshop in there, I'd have, gone wholeheartedly. Story has a problem for me in that it doesn't handle layers well. So if I'm shooting a narrative drama where I've got two actors and a script that goes for pages and pages and pages, great. But if I'm just immediately going to visual effects type work, which I tend to, or short form work, where I've got just a couple of layers, like let's say we've got Angie for FX Guide TV. There's no way of saying, well, this is Angie, this is Angie's background, these are related elements, I'm going to schedule them separately and build them up, and by the way, there's another element in the foreground of that. Even a 3-layer thing kind of defeats it. And of course, most stuff would be like at 18 layers that you'd want to sort of break down. So the purpose of having a breakdown tool, in my opinion, is to handle the stuff you can't keep in your head, and the stuff you can keep in your head is the sort of stuff that Story handles. That being said, Adobe would say there are 180,000 people that either use it or have downloaded it. So, but for our case, I don't find Story that great. We tried using it at 3210, and it just wasn't something we went with. We went with a completely different solution. Prelude is the next one, and I'll come back to that, and that's this idea of ingesting our material, which would have been, in our case, Red Cine X. And then you've got Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, which is their audio stuff, so doing that mix that I wanted to do. Speed Grade, which of course is a full grading package bought by Adobe. And then their encoder, which would go out to their either final output or some system, because they do have some really good stuff on the right there for servers, so that you can have materials served out on a web kind of environment. And then Encore is the DVD product. Okay, and then on the right at the bottom, there's some other logos there about HTML5 and also Adobe Anywhere, which I'll come back to, and their cloud computing stuff. And there's been a big push by the guys at Adobe to not only offer you the apps in a monthly kind of scheme, but as part of that have file transfers. So you could actually have files that are being accessed by Premiere. Premiere itself may be coming on this sort of monthly cloud kind of notion, but if I go to another computer, those same files are available as the program is, and so that's all part of their cloud strategy. And then at the bottom, you'll see there's a few other things there. Cloud stuff I was just sort of touching on, a bunch of third-party tools, which I'll also touch on, and some new stuff that they've been buying in, like Automatic Duck. And we certainly used Automatic Duck ages ago. We don't use it now, but it is a good tool if you're trying to move EDLs around and do stuff. So you've basically got this sort of dream line of Adobe products, and it's great. But how does that reality sort of bear when you actually come to do real jobs? And that's what we're going to discuss in the rest of the class. I will say one thing. This set of products that they've got is pretty impressive. Okay, so one of the things that matters a lot to us is working with a lot of different products, and there are a lot of different products in the post space that we have to deal with. Now, I already mentioned, obviously, the R3D files, but the fact that Premiere works really well with Apple is a huge deal for us because we all have laptops and computers. We've got a huge amount of infrastructure. I mean, I'm not saying that this is perfect for you, but I'm just saying this is what we have, so it matters to us. But also things like Blackmagic are really important because we are increasingly doing more with them. So this entire sphere of products that we live in all matters, and the fact that Adobe is trying to work with these guys makes a big difference to us. Which is all part of their strategy, of course, to make Premiere the Photoshop of video editing. And that's a reasonable strategy. I mean, I'd certainly have that strategy if I was Adobe, and there's nothing actually stopping them doing that. At the Premiere level, Premiere is really, really good. I like it, and the guys like it. I think it's a really good product. I just don't think they're quite there yet on the extended picture. But it is focused on the professional markets, and it was a little nerve-wracking that Premiere stopped being on the Mac and then came back to it, but let's hope Adobe's learnt its lesson there. It is well able to be integrated into other pipelines, especially with things like the Duck, and you can extend it and build stuff out with the XML as we tend to do. There is a big focus in Adobe's pipeline on the metadata, and they want you to be able to do stuff such as in Story have a script which then feeds into a breakdown of the shots based on what it's hearing in the audio from the actors, so that you can do a rough cut assembly when you were at the ingest stage, leading into a Premiere thing. And that for me just doesn't work at all. And of course, they're trying to build collaboration and build stuff up on the cloud, because any company that's listed on the stock exchanges and talking about cloud apparently is in trouble. Duck, if you don't know, or Automatic Duck, is a really good tool for working Premiere into a mixed Final Cut XML environment, but also stuff with OMF and AAF, stuff to do with Avid, Final Cut, basically integrating out and passing those EDLs and edit decision lists around, so all those file formats around, so that you can translate between them and do that really effectively. Okay, so Prelude. I've said that we don't use it, so why not? Well, for a start, it can't ingest audio-only files. So if you remember, I said that we tended to record audio files on here. So even though it says it works with WAV and AIF files, we can't get it to take the files that are recorded on our disk here. So we plug this into our Macs, and we can't get that to easily go in to Premiere via Prelude. So I guess that's a huge downer, because that's exactly what you want it to do. The metadata idea here is that you would add all sorts of tags and metadata at the ingest stage, and that would all be passed down the line. And that does work pretty well if you're doing a purely QuickTime kind of flow. But if you, well, there are two ways of doing it, basically. There's a sidecar XML, or it goes into the QuickTime file. But of course, if you're using original R3D files, it can't add metadata to the R3D files. So if you are doing a pipeline that involves R3D at the later Premiere stage, adding all this metadata at the ingest stage isn't kind of getting you anywhere particularly, and in fact adds kind of problems to it and complexities in terms of sidecars and stuff. The other thing is this idea that I would do a rough track based on the edit, and that I would pass that to Premiere. And I think that sounds like a great tool. Like, I would be on the road and I'd do an interview and I'd do a rough cut with some stuff that was happening, and then I would hand it to the guys and say, hey, these are the bits that I thought were really cool. Could you do it properly and tighten up the edit? Problem here is this rough cut feature has only one layer. You can't stack up multiple layers of stuff. And so if you can't stack up multiple layers of stuff, it's so annoying that you kind of just, I'll just do it in Premiere. Because if you've got Prelude, you've got Premiere. So why are you doing it in Prelude? You'll just use Premiere. So some of the reason we don't use Prelude is simply that we don't need to use it, and some of the reason is we just do it in Premiere. Also, there is, I should say, and one of the guys in the office pointed this out, you might use the single timeliney stuff if you were doing a multi-camera shoot, you're just trying to cut between them, and I can imagine there would be scenarios like that, but the second you want to add a dissolve, you're in trouble, and the second you want to do any kind of layering up, which we nearly invariably always want to do, you've got problems. And one of the classic things I would love to do at the earlier stage is just tag who these people are and sort of pick some camera angles, and to not be able to layer those up is just super annoying. There are a bunch of other markers and metadata that you can add, and I've got to say they're probably designed for other applications or companies other than us, so they're just not very relevant to us. Oh, and the speech functionality. That idea that I would give them the script. Initially, when they came out with it, it was like, you'll just analyze what's being said, like I am now, and it will tell you what I've been said, and you could just quickly see visually, Mike said this, go to that point, and that gets you that point in the video. That doesn't work. So then they said, oh, actually, what they're going to do is if you've got a script that Mike's saying, which, by the way, just completely vetoed everyone using this for documentary work and shooting off the cuff as we are. But if you had a script, then it would use the script to work out what those words are, and it would line those up. And again, I just don't find that works. For a start, there's just too many other words that get said and people go off script. But I guess in a perfect test lab environment, if I said a long paragraph and kept it word perfect and it could understand what I was saying, you'll be able to use the script to kind of work out where I'm at. But it's just such a limited case. It's of no use pretty much whatsoever. Okay, so where are we at? Okay, so for my personal take, collage is irrelevant. I use Photoshop. As far as using story goes, I just don't think it's relevant to the sort of work we do, and I'm a bit dubious about it anyway. It would be great if Prelude actually did something that we wanted, but I don't think that it's where it's at. So we basically lose this. At the other end, we lose some of the encoding stuff. So what we're left with is this really great bit in the middle, and not just what's on the Adobe sort of linear diagram, but also Photoshop and Lightroom and a bunch of other stuff that sit in this space. And I know Adobe wants to grow this way and go that way, and I applaud them trying, don't get me wrong, but just for me it's not working. I'm really interested, however, in vertical, and as we'll probably look into later in the term, it's transmedia stuff that splits assets so they can be used in different ways between, say, games and 3D assets moving in between stuff that can happen on the net and e-publishing. All of that stuff really interests me. This linear path isn't quite as interesting to me. Other more interesting things to me, for example, from Adobe are things like InDesign. But that's just my take on what we're using. But so good is Premiere that I think we could, on the basis of it alone, move back to an Adobe Edit workflow. Okay, so the grading, we do that on DaVinci. And here, I wish I could give you some awesome reasons why we don't use speed grade, but it's pretty simple, really. We started using DaVinci. We like DaVinci. It's a good product. It's really affordable. They give it away now with the new camera. We know it. It works. The biggest problem that Adobe has in the case of us is we just need a reason to change. And I have to tell you that this is very common, I've found. You might think that we would use the best product, but you tend to use the best product inside a range of products, right? Like if you've got 3 products that are pretty similar and one might be a bit better than the others, if you know one of the other products, you're just going to use it, and that's the case with us. I actually think DaVinci is great. I have no reason to change. If you love speed grade, and I have nothing wrong with speed grade, but you have to sort of give me more than just you love it. You have to give me a huge reason to go and learn something new. Now, if you came and worked here and you wanted to use speed grade, I'd have no problem with that because it's a good program. That gets us to the final reconform and compression. Okay, so we have a couple of test shots we ran through. We used the 5D and we did a short thing that's about 7 minutes long. I think it's 7 minutes and 4 seconds. And we ran that through as a standard kind of little test clip that we would do as per standard procedure for anything. Might be FX Guide TV, might be for downloading here at PhD. 960 by 540, H.264. In compressor, it was about 10 minutes long, and the resulting file was about 65.5 megabytes. In media encoder, the Adobe product, the first time we ran it through, it took only sort of 6.5 minutes, which was awesome, and it was about the same file size, 67 meg. That's pretty good. Unfortunately, only the first frame of the entire clip was any good. The rest of it was just crap, so we had to throw that away and try again. The second time we did it, it took about 12 minutes. The file size was again about 66 meg. It looked awesome until we tried testing it on an iPhone or an iPad, and it wouldn't play on either of them, and I don't know why that is. And Encoder, the Adobe product, doesn't support network rendering. So it doesn't support being able to send it out to multiple machines as we can with Compressor from Final Cut. And there seemed to be a weird 2 gig limit as well. And that's just enough for me, right? Because we've got something that works really well, and we've really fine-tuned, and I should say John came up with nearly all of the research on this. Really great settings for what we do. It's kind of our secret sauce. We just aren't going to keep bothering with that, because if it's not producing good results and it's failing and it's not playing on iPads and why would we worry? So we don't use it. Distribution, that's an entirely separate class. We wanted to go into distribution and how we actually do all the stuff with all the servers. We did it. It's a totally separate class. It's all managed out of the Chicago office. Ryan, John, and the guys do a brilliant job in doing that over multiple sites with caching and a ton of stuff. I don't have anything to do with any of that, and this class is mainly focused on production. Obviously, I appreciate what we're doing, and I think it's really good. In fact, it's spectacularly good in terms of how much both stuff is backed up and distributed for distribution around the world. But the guys keep a really close eye on that and make sure you get the optimum results. Which brings us to one other huge factor of why we're interested in Premiere, which is Adobe Anywhere. Now, this is something that would, I hope, be a sort of category killer, cool thing that we're going to do, but I can't tell you that it works right now because it's not out. But I believe it will, and I believe it'll make a really big difference to the adoption of Premiere. It's basically a file-based workflow where you actually have a central hub that distributes out and sort of streams effectively to our satellite workstations, and then we edit, and then that all comes back to the central server, in this case in our equipment room. This reduces the need to have really high-end machines at the desktop, and the laptops that we're using, like these, we can't put NVIDIA cards in and a bunch of other stuff in them. We can't really honestly put our hands on our hearts and say we should buy a bunch more towers, because the towers seem to be lingering at Apple. So this is a great solution for us in terms of our hardware and our software, because it reduces the media handling and gives us a really good way forward. If you're not aware of Adobe Anywhere, we have run stuff on FX Guide about it. Just a quick overview. There's a collaborative hub, which in our case would be in the equipment room, with a Mercury streaming engine. Now that has asset management stuff and all the storage hanging off it. And then what happens is we have these clients spread around the place that have anything like After Effects, Premiere, or Prelude, though I doubt we'll use Prelude. And it could be a tower or a laptop that's using that, but the point is it's getting a stream in real time that we're editing with, but we're not actually hitting the original source files. As a consequence, you've basically got like a kind of a dumb terminal almost that you're cutting on, and it puts all the weight back in the middle, which is just terrific. It also helps, as we have here, with collaboration, because we've got multiple guys doing editing, and stuff gets moved around based on who's doing what. So that's great. We don't have to worry about where the project files are. We don't have to have large amounts of traffic on our network. We don't have to relink media and worry about trying to solve that kind of a problem. It makes versioning and backing up easier, because there's no risk of stuff being on local files or local hard drives. It all gets kept on the central server. And it's going to work, I think, really well in terms of this streaming proxy idea across our network. We could use any of the Adobe products with it. As I said, we're much more likely to use like something like an After Effects or a Premiere, but a whole bunch of Adobe products will work this way. So that's the primary edit flow, but I would be really remiss if I didn't cover a couple more things. And certainly one of the questions that started all this was how we go about doing our archives. So let's have a look behind the scenes out the back in our equipment room. I don't think we've ever filmed out here before. Okay, so this is a tempo time navigator. This is the LTO machine, or tape robot. As you can see here, we've got LTO4s, and this is what we use for basically doing our backup and archiving. I confess I don't actually do this myself. The other guys do this, but LTO is terrific. LTO4 is a really good format, and we want to be able to archive and, of course, back up two separate problems. We want to be able to keep online. We normally keep this term, the previous term, sometimes the term before that, and the term before that gets archived and stored separately. But then, of course, we have backups as well, so that if anything was to die or crash, we'd be able to restore. And, of course, what we're doing here is mirrored by the output of this office going via dark fibre to the US. So if all of this burnt down, we'd also have stuff in the US. So we have a lot of stuff. And what we have here, quite frankly, is dwarfed by what's happening in the LA and Chicago offices, because these guys are much better. Much more is done because, of course, this is just like a satellite, effectively, of the company. We only worry about our stuff here. This feeds into the bigger PhD problem. And we have some other stuff in the room. Of course, we have a tape machine. We have one tape machine left in our tape library. It's a DigiBeta. We don't use it very often. And a ton of storage. But that's just some of the stuff we have. Of course, we have Photoshop and Illustrator and Lightroom. We have, well, I use PTGui Pro for doing my HDRs, for example. I have, you know, we all use a bunch of programs for managing our own productivity, stuff on the net. So Evernote, for example, is used extensively. There's a lot of stuff in the office. I'm forgetting, of course, Nuke, After Effects, Flame, and Smoke, which is, of course, used for doing a lot of compositing and putting stuff together. I don't know how I could forget those. And those suites are down the other end of the building. But in addition to that, there's just a ton of other stuff that we have that we use on a day-to-day basis that I haven't really gone through. As you can imagine, yourself, you have just a ton of apps that we use. We've hit most of the main production units. There's only one that I've kind of skipped over, which I'm kind of hoping that you guys won't notice. Which just leaves actually our asset management system. And I wish I could, I'm really kind of embarrassed about this. I really wish I could say to you that we've got a fully working, super duper, U-bang, mega cool asset management system happening out of our Sydney office. It's been on my agenda now for 6 months. We've been working with it. We are definitely working with the guys from Shotgun on scheduling stuff and feeding in to look at Tank and other things like that. But we don't have that implemented right now for a bunch of reasons. We do have a ton of other tools that I haven't touched on, but I think the biggest one that I would like to say I had implemented and I can't is a full-on asset management system for managing all our clips and stuff. So we do have really good procedures. Stuff is, we obviously work on a term basis, so we know very much where we are with our data at the end of each term, and we can access into that. But we don't have the kind of asset management that I think we could really benefit from. But then that's the problem, isn't it? No one's perfect. And you really want to invest time in doing stuff, but then you've got other projects going on. Plus the other thing is I've only been focused here on the classes for FX PhD, but out of this office and from the team here, we also make FX Guide TV, 3 or 4 audio podcasts, though some are done out of Chicago. And as part of those, we're constantly accessing tools for doing stuff and, of course, writing articles for FX Guide, as well as our new e-publishing stuff. And as you know, we've published a couple of iBooks lately. We're moving further into doing electronic publishing as well. So all of that is in addition to the stuff we've been talking about today. Well, again, as I said at the outset, this all came about because of a question that you asked in the forum. So if you have a particular question that you'd like addressed, please fire it in the forums. I'd love to be able to address them. And I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.